another episode of We Weren't Talking to You. It's a conversation between me, Anne, and my husband,
Josh.
We've made it to episode 2, Josh. How are you
Yes.
feeling about it?
Good. I think that this episode's going to be more interesting, more aligned. You know, some would say, just me pretty much, that we kind of rambled on a little bit on the last one, but we've watched some podcasts and it seems like rambling is an okay thing to do on a podcast.
So we're pro rambling right now.
Yes, we're pro rambling.
I think we're pro giving time and space for discussions, not circling back to the same thing over and over again. But
Yes, more than 5 times.
if I had any feedback for us, it's that I felt like we were a little lecture-y, like informing
Yes.
versus just discussion. So that's my goal for today. I don't know if we'll achieve it, but we're going to do our best.
Yeah.
So today we're going to start with an important topic, which is the Apple Worldwide Developer Conference happened on Monday, June 9th. This is like the software release. They do this every year over the summer where they basically talk about their new upcoming operating system or operating systems, the new features that they're going to do. So that was on Monday. Just adding some details here. It's free to watch online on YouTube. It's streamed live like an Apple event, much like when they release their products in like September, etc. So this is, I think, probably the second largest like Apple thing that they do every year. I don't know what your perspective is on that, but that's kind of how I would say. I'd say like the most important thing Apple does every year is like their new iPhone releases where they talk about their great hardware and what's coming. Mm-hmm. And then there's this, which happens in the beginning of June every year. And then there's maybe something in like March sometimes around like different refreshes. So anyway, so WWDC 2025. I don't know where you want to start. So I have one thing queued up, which is the video introducing what was probably the most important concept of the entire thing.
Let's start there, and then we'll discuss that.
All right. So please enjoy this video. We might stop or. Oh, here we go. What could it be?
Software is the heart and soul of our products.
Is
it brings
it?
them to life, shapes their personality, and defines their purpose. At Apple, we've always believed it's the deep integration of hardware and software that makes interacting with technology intuitive, beautiful, and a joy to use. iOS 7 introduced a simplified design built on distinct layers, smooth animations, and new colors. It redefined our design language for years to come. Now, with the powerful advances in our hardware, silicon, and graphics technologies, we have the opportunity to lay the foundation for the next chapter of our software. Today, we're excited to announce our broadest design update ever. Our goal is a beautiful new design that brings joy and delight to every user experience, one that's more personal and puts greater focus on your content, all while still feeling instantly familiar. And for the first time, we're introducing a universal design across our platforms. This unified design language creates a more harmonious experience as you move between products while maintaining the qualities that make each unique. Inspired by the physicality and richness of Vision OS, we challenged ourselves to make something purely digital feel natural and alive.
What could it be?
From how it looks to how it feels.
Oh.
It's like glass.
Stop it. You really.
To achieve this, we began by rethinking the fundamental elements that make up our software. And it starts with an entirely new expressive material
Giving away this.
we call liquid glass.
But it's
With
liquid.
the optical qualities of glass and a fluidity that only Apple can achieve, it transforms depending on your content or even your context and brings more clarity to navigation and controls. It beautifully refracts light and dynamically reacts to your movement with specular highlights. This material brings a new level of vitality to every aspect of your experience. From the smallest elements you interact with to larger ones, it responds in real time to your content and your input, creating a more lively experience that we think you'll find truly delightful. Elements once considered for rectangular displays have been redesigned to fit perfectly concentric with the rounded corners of the hardware. This establishes greater harmony between our software and hardware, where thoughtfully considered groups of controls free up valuable space for your content. Liquid glass is translucent and behaves just like glass
my
in the
favorite
real
part.
world. Its color is informed by your content and intelligently adapts between light and dark environments. And as a distinct functional layer that sits above your app, the material dynamically morphs when you need more options or as you move between views. We've applied this same dynamic nature across other experiences. Instead of taking over your whole display, alerts appear from where you tap. Context menus expand into an easily scannable list. When you scroll, tab bars shrink to elevate what's in front of you, and they instantly come back the moment you scroll up. Your entire experience becomes more intuitive, from navigating apps to system experiences like the lock screen, notifications, and control center. App icons have been crafted with multiple layers of liquid glass and come to life in light mode, dark mode, colorful new tints, or an all-new clear look. The new design extends to the dock and even to your widgets, giving you an entirely new way to personalize your experience. We've always cared deeply about every detail of our software design, and it's these moments of beauty, craft, and joy that bring our products to life. Our new design blurs the lines between hardware and software to create an experience that's more delightful than ever, while still familiar and easy to use. Today marks an exciting and beautiful new chapter for our design, one that sets the stage for our next era of our products and how you interact with them every day.
Okay, so worth saying that this wasn't the only thing that they talked about. This, I guess the best way I would describe it is like they introduced this, like they kind of launched with this concept of one, unifying their operating system, two, redesigning is a strong word there, like redesigning and integrating liquid glass throughout. And then they did also talk a lot about software improvements. So first, Josh, go ahead. First impressions, what did you think? I mean, obviously there's a lot more to cover, but where are you at with this?
So just to get the positive stuff out of the way, the glass effect is very nice. We've updated a lot of our hardware, phones, iPads, the Apple TV, all have been updated. And the glass is nice. It's clearly like V1 or whatever. I'm guessing they're going to add more depth and stuff to it. Like, you know, you see these big, thick blocks with like a really good refraction on it. And like, it's not quite there yet in the OSs, but I'm guessing that's because it's like, you know, beta 0 right now. And they're probably just going to continuously work on it. And that's kind of the thing I like about Apple is that, you know, you look at Windows Vista, which, you know, is a lot of people who say this is kind of like that. But Vista never looked like glass. It was clearly just like, you know, transparency with a little bit of an overlay on it, whatever. They've really taken the effort to see what things would look like when glass went over it, and then program.
The Glass Lab is like, I love the Glass Lab. It's ridiculous. Like,
right, but well, I like the fact that they did it. If you're gonna do it, then doing it right is the right way to do it. And they did. They didn't just say like, I think glass does this. They showed like, you know, they have a giant phone printout and they're like running glass over it to see how the light changes as it goes through it. And that's good. You know, that's really getting into it. I'll stop there.
okay, so fine. You know, it's beautiful, right? Like, yes. So one of the just some interesting things about what this new UI is, like, I've made a comment that like my phone doesn't look as smart or has kind of been dumbed down. And I don't mean that in like a bad way, but like everything's like bigger, I guess I would say. Mm-hmm. Like buttons are more prominent. A really good example of this is in mini menus that you go into, there's like a check mark that'll come up when you're like done with some sort of thing. One of the things you had commented on is that, you know, sometimes with the touch screen, it's really hard to tell if you actually pushed a button, which is totally a software issue, right? But we're pushing all these virtual buttons, and so maybe there's more reality to this. But I want to pause and just say, like, seriously, like, what the fuck are we talking about? We're talking about we've had the largest explosion of improvements to software this year by virtue of artificial intelligence. Apple, so I didn't say this, but when Tim opened it, he's like, hey, I think it was Tim, it might have been the Craig guy with the big hair, but basically Siri was absent. Like they basically said, we're still working on Siri, but I'm not going to say her name anymore. But it needs refinement, and there will be more developments later this year. Like literally, that was all that was said. There was no voice of her. There was no, beautiful gradient surround associated with Apple Intelligence / her voice assistant. So she was intentionally missing, and they didn't harp on it. But like seriously, let's take a moment here. Apple is one of the, if not probably the largest phone manufacturer, at least in the United States. It has a huge following of people. We choose to have Apple products. We like Apple products. We choose, given the choices, to go with it. And there is a lot of synergy between the products. We're experiencing that synergy right now. You're on an iPad. Here's an iPad mini, here's an iPhone, there's an Apple TV, this is being shot on an iPhone, right? So that's all legit, that's all real. But one of the things that's kind of came out last year, so let me back up and say, when they announced the iPhone 16, which we both have.
This is the most important part.
Yes, so they announced the iPhone 16 in September. Now, if you think about where we were at in the AI realm, ChatGPT has been mainstreamed. I think we're still in that sort of era of like, it hallucinates all the time. It does really bad things. I feel like some of that
killed
energy
several children.
Has died down. But I think everybody was holding their breath to see how Apple was going to do this. And Apple, from a branding perspective, is like, we're going to call it Apple Intelligence. We're not going to call it artificial intelligence. Here's what Apple Intelligence means to us, which is like personalized, private, maybe brings delight would be a thing. And if you recall, the way that they had talked about how they were, so I'm laughing because silicon is a big component of this. Like first, yes, Apple has all silicone chips at this point. What's glass made from? Silicon. But what they announced at that point was a lot of image generation, so Genmoji, so the ability to create new emojis on the fly, the image playground, the ability to make images, mostly associated with your contacts, but it could be anything locally on your phone. They announced, but it never came to any sort of meaningful reality, that the voice assistant could be integrated with ChatGPT and you could hand off the experience. Like if the voice assistant couldn't handle the experience, then you could hand it off to ChatGPT so it could provide a better response or maybe, more things. One thing I think is that ChatGPT and web search was not maybe mainstream at that time, and now it's like extremely mainstream. If you look at our own behaviors, like we are fully using ChatGPT for the majority of our web searches. It kind of depends on the topic, but I'd say 80 to 95% easily. So that's where they left off. And when they did this, they were like, oh, it's going to be a developer preview. We're going to come out with this later, this in the fall or something like that. They probably said fall or maybe later this year. Off of that announcement, we had already planned on getting new phones. They had kind of put some cutoff dates between what the phones were going to be able to do in terms of the AI models on board. And they kind of said if it gets iPhone 15 forward, would be able to have the processing power associated with this. We have 14s at the time, so we decided to go to 16s. Blah, 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 blah. But they had promised basically since September to keep going on this stuff. And they kind of went this route of like, we're opening it up to the developer community. Everything's going to be out in beta, which is very atypical for Apple. You don't see in like a mainstream OS release a lot of beta things. Like I think that they pretty much released Genmoji to the mainstream population on their operating system. It's kind of hard to tell because we are in the development program. But I decided that we would begin being a part of the developer program to experience some of these beta updates. And that was mostly driven by, at the time, what a nice little novice, I was so naive at that point. I'm like, great, Apple's going to do this really well. It's going to be really sleek. They're promising a future where I can probably talk to a voice assistant or maybe type in. They were doing a big typing in thing. Remember that whole tap the bottom bar and the keyboard would fly up type thing? Great. I'm finally going to be able to automate my calendar, make a lot of these sort of like granular, like, think about adding a bunch of calendar events to our family calendar, and like you have to go through all these different little sub-menus. You have to fill out all these little details. You have to move stuff around. It's a nightmare. You're keeping it up between two people. So that was me. That's where I was at that point. That was September. None of that shit's happened. Let's just say that. None of that shit's happened. There's no integration. I don't trust their voice assistant. It is remarkably unintelligent, and I'm irritated by this, mostly because of the thing that Josh probably doesn't like about it, and you can tell me this, and we'll talk more directly to one another. I think it's, you get irritated by this because I say, well, they have everything under their control. Literally, they design all of their software, their productivity tools, their calendar, their listing, their messages, their mail app, the photo, the camera, the game, on and on and on and on and on. Like if you had a one kind of message or belief about Apple, it's that they lock their shit down and they make it very specific. Like they build the hardware and the software that powers their machines. There is no outside influence. It's way different than, let's say a PC where Microsoft is the operating system, but the entire hardware is put together by like a Dell or like a Lenovo. I mean, the Android world's a bit different, but I honestly don't know. I don't know how many Android phones are Google phones versus Samsung phones and which one's more popular. I still think both are probably fairly popular in the mainstream, but that's the thing Apple never has to deal with. They get to decide. Everything's their thing. So continuity should be at 100%. It's a closed system.
Yeah.
And they haven't delivered on any of that.
Yeah, I think that's the number one thing, is that they said that you would need a new phone to use Apple Intelligence, and then abandoned Apple Intelligence and didn't tell anybody until this week.
That's a good way to put it, yeah.
It's been, a year since we saw the Apple Intelligence information. Like there was
a year? Or you think it was last June, or it was in September?
Well, the WWDC last year showed all this information.
Okay.
But we had 14s, and we weren't going to buy 15s for that. So we didn't actually get into it until we bought our 16s, went on to the betas, and started playing with it. And it was, to be clear, it was never any good. The Genmojis were fine.
The Genmojis were good.
Were fine.
Good.
They were acceptably made. I did like the concept that they kind of got around the whole, copyright and all these things that, plague AI. It's generative AI. That was a good concept. I like when people do that. You can't really say, oh, well, I design emojis, and these are all, Apple's designed emojis. So if they traded on all that stuff, then that's along the same lines. They own it or whatever, so it's theirs to do with whatever they want. But there was always a lot of issues with it. About half the time you wouldn't get anything usable. You'd have to work with it for 10, 15 minutes before you did get something really good.
Made your phone really hot.
But then the main thing is so that's fun, it's great, but these productivity things are just non-existent. And that's where, I've always thought it was funny that Siri couldn't do this stuff because, like Ann said, all this stuff is just built into the phone. So leave off the apps. Maybe you don't like calendar or whatever. Siri can't navigate your settings. Siri can't change the change from silent to loud or whatever. There's things that Siri just can't do that just doesn't make any sense.
Stop saying your name.
Oh, sorry. There's things that she can't do that doesn't make any sense. And so this was kind of a thing oh, wow, they're going to really get this going. And then instead, they just kind of did this glass thing and then said, we're not doing AI because it's not accurate enough yet. And that's really, it wasn't up to their standards. Whatever you want to say, they are making excuses is really what's happening, because this is...
The experience wasn't what they wanted it to be.
Right. And this is in a world where AI is what's happening. Like you waited a year in AI to say we're taking a break from AI until it gets it right, and maybe that's okay. Maybe that's a good strategy. It scares me because I think that they've really. I think it's a cultural issue, and they're not willing.
Corporate cultural.
Yeah, they're not willing to give up the control to AI, and so they're trying their best to make it so like, X always equals Y or whatever. Whenever you push a button, whenever you say a question, it always outputs this, which is kind of like against how AI works, but is how the future is going to work. So I don't know really what the long-term strategy is if you're ignoring AI. It'd be like ignoring 5G or whatever. Like you're like, oh yeah, 5G. I think we'll just skip 5G and wait for 6G. I don't think that that's a good example. And the thing is like Apple does this sometimes. Apple waits a little bit longer and people are like, oh, we've had that feature for 2 years or whatever. Like even 5G, they're like, oh, well, 3G was the one. Like 3G, they released a phone, 3G was out and they didn't have 3G on the phone yet way back in the day. And so they waited a year. But that was a year in like 2008, 2009. Like a year now is a completely different time frame. If they wait a year to get their AI, to start working on AI, I don't know that there's going to be enough to implement, but maybe AI will help them implement it.
Well, I think that's one thing that you and I talk about all the time is this idea that so to back up a bit, there were a couple more, like Microsoft had a developer conference, Google had a developer conference in the end of May, and you could tell that they were using AI to accelerate their AI initiatives.
Yes.
They were using AI to accelerate their software. They were using it in different places, and you can see that. I think if you are adept enough, you can kind of see it in some of the websites you go to or some of the app experiences that you have, that some of the software is just getting
A lot better
very quickly.
Yes.
Which is good. I spend a lot of time researching and learning about AI and kind of following it. And one thing that's apparent and very abundantly clear at this point is that AI has very good, I'm not going to say mastery, but has a very good command of programming.
Yes.
So especially if you imagine you're already a software engineer or someone who's used to working in any sort of programming language or programming capacity, and that's anything from Excel functions and formulas all the way to software development, really, finite things. AI's got your back. It knows it. These are closed systems that have rules built into them. So they're much easier, I think, for AI to master. And that's one thing I think maybe that was probably missing in this and I've had this critique for other companies, other software companies, is how are you, Apple, using AI inside? How are your employees using AI inside the company to further your initiatives or just to do stuff? Because there is no denying, I'm tired of oh, it writes all my emails. Fine, it writes all your emails. Great. It summarizes things really well. Beautiful. It puts out bullet points. We've all gone on a million meetings now where there's different note-taking services, etc. And they did say, this is one thing that's kind of interesting, and I would be very curious about this, is probably one of the most under-received, under-recognized things that Apple did, and I think it's because it's kind of kludgy, to be honest, is that they added transcriptions to voice memos. So that is all running AI. Of course, it's different than generative AI. The thing I would be curious is that their own transcription model, or have they piggybacked off of OpenAI's transcription model, which is called Whisper? But that's probably the most functional aspect of AI, I think, in the Apple ecosystem, even today. Genmoji's great. I love it, but it doesn't work cross-platform in the same way. They come across as stickers. They are cute. For someone like me that's very visually expressive, it makes sense. But I'm an outlier at this.
Yeah.
I care way more about what does the emoji heart that I send to people look like, than pretty much everyone I've ever met.
Yes.
I have a signature emoji, right? Like that's, nobody else has that. And so I think that they really kind of drown themselves out in that regard. One thing I said, and we should talk about this, is like, I was like, well, what's Apple going to do now? And they kind of I said, well, should Apple just become a hardware company? Should they just double down on hardware? Because they do have a lot of really good, interesting things going for them. They have biometrics, right? Like they have the watch. They have a lot of, they've worked a lot to, get legitimate biometric data, which is challenging, and to record it for a long time. These people, us, we have our devices on us near whatever amount of time. They've done a great job. I think Apple Health is a beautiful integration of a lot of different health information if you choose to use it. The fitness, it's funny because like Apple Fitness, I remember when that came out, people were kind of like, I don't know if people actually use it, but we use Apple Fitness, and,
Yes.
and there's a benefit to that. It stays inside. Everything is there. Everything is within your phone. Everything is within your identity in the Apple realm. And Apple does promise way more than everyone else, and this is part of what they announced at the end of September, and maybe they can't even follow in this sword anymore, but their big thing was privacy. So part of what they introduced was this idea of a virtual private cloud experience where maybe the thing you needed to use AI for was a model that was not housed locally and couldn't be done on your phone or on your device. So that process was going to be handed off. And they're very adamant about complete privacy. They don't want to house your data. They don't want to be subpoenaed about your data. They want your data to be a closed system that you have complete control over. Again, you think back to where the culture, societal complaints were about AI then, and it's changed, but we've had, the Screen Actor Guild, we've had the strikes, and they've been subsequently closed related to a lot of the Hollywood stuff. I don't think people necessarily care about that much anymore, which is kind of sticky. I don't think that's necessarily a good thing, but I think that, I think you should care about privacy when it comes to AI. Yes. I think, you can have these very vulnerable conversations. I guess you can really, if you use AI for any period of time, you can really get into the weeds of like who you are and your identity, even just asking basic stuff, right? Like even if you're like, searching for jeans, you might say like, look, I don't like the way my ankles look. It's a struggle, right? Like there's a lot more that you are giving away and kind of verbally defining as it relates to your identity than you would in like a normal search. Anyway, I don't want to get too in the weeds on it, but so going back to my kind of statement of like, well, maybe Apple should just focus on hardware for a while. So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, that's so not to get too deep either, but that's where everything eventually goes anyway. I think that hardware is the future, open hardware is the future, open source software is the future, and Apple is giving a masterclass in why that is. They have basically dropped the ball as far as keeping up with AI, and now everybody else is ahead of them. What that means is that you can get a Google phone and have it walk you down the street and tell you what's around you and things like that, and then have it generate a video for you, or wear some Google glasses that have maps in them and things like that. And Apple has added transparency, which was already in the OS, but now it's got a little bit of bevel on it. So they've added bevel and transparency to their OS. They did it really nicely, but that's what they've done. The thing is Apple does have really good hardware. We could talk specs, we could talk all those things, but when it comes down to it, they have good and easy to interact with hardware, but they've locked it 100% down in their own thing. And so I don't know that they're going to be okay with saying, you know what, everybody, the entire world is going to be faster at developing software than we are. So we need to open up portions of our hardware. We need to make our hardware a good platform for all kinds of things.
So what you mean by that is like, you know, when we used to build PCs, it's like you could go buy an Intel chip off the shelf in a box and put it on a motherboard. You could never do that with an Apple chip. Do you think that that paradigm is going to change?
Yeah, no, I don't. And I think that that's what Apple's going to offer is a really good pre-built platform.
So you think the device is the platform?
Right. They have to get out of the way of the software. And I don't know if that's an abstraction layer thing, like if they're going to build a bulletproof, like, you know, layer 1 OS, and then you could do whatever you want on top of it, or whatever those things are. And we'll see as apps go crazy over the next year, because app development is not going to wait for Apple to finish what they're doing.
It's gonna fill in any gaps it can until Apple decides to take it over. I think maybe a good example is like the Journal app. Like that's a very fantastical one in the sense that like for a very long time Apple didn't have anything associated with journaling. There was no experience. They finally added a journal experience, and I think there was like maybe this fear that like any sort of journaling app was going to be obsolete, and I don't think that that reality has come to fruition at all. Before we move on, I just want to talk about a couple things that are in there. Like if you are listening to this and you have an Apple phone and you want to know what's coming with just their software updates, I want to hit some of the things that were exciting and we have enjoyed from that, because beyond the AI discussion, which is worth saying to Josh's point, they've kind of leaned in this direction because they've opened up a lot of their AI models on board to be able to access them. It's not in the main keynote or whatever, but it is in other areas where part of their actual programming language and the way they're kind of softwaring developer paradigm now allows for evocation of these onboard models, so to speak. Models, I'm not saying just their models. And one thing I can tell you as it relates to that, and I don't want to like harp on it or get too deep, is that you can tell from their approach, this goes back to what you said, that a lot of how they're thinking about generative AI is in structured data format. So in the same way, you know, maybe an easy example is like a calendar invite, right? So a calendar invite has a couple common things. It has the name of it, it has a start time, it has a stop time, it has a location field, there's an ability to add notes, invitees as you get onto it, reminders associated with it. So you can imagine generative AI needing to have a sense of what different elements of that calendar invite, you know, you imagine filling out like a hand invitation from a long time ago, what it needs to do. And it's taking a very, you know, structured, meaning it's being very rigid in like, this is the title, this is this, and making sure that it grabs those elements from a developer perspective to work through these experiences. I've dabbled in that world, and I think it's kind of overkill, but I could be totally wrong. I'm not a software engineer, but I think that that's a little overkill. It's not a bad thing, and it's certainly going to be necessary, but it's a lot to kind of maybe be like, well, we really wanted to get structured, you know, generative experiences right first. But let's talk about some of the things that we saw, because what they did say is they're now, so they have said they're unifying all their operating systems. So ideally you get the same experience across all of your different devices, to be determined. But I feel like this is sort of like saying, and you can kind of see it in some of the different bits, we'll see how long it takes, that if you are an app developer, like you design the widget for the phone and the widget will work on the iPad, it will work on a MacBook, it'll work on whatever, it'll work across the different operating systems, CarPlay, where that wasn't necessarily the case before. The big thing that they're doing is they're unifying all their operating systems by giving them all year indicators now, which is a very common thing in the software realm. We've seen a lot of those folks kind of
definitely in corporate
switch. Yeah. So this will be 26. So whatever version of OS, you know, iOS, Mac OS, Watch OS, blah, 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 OS now becomes 26 when it comes out. It's in developer preview right now. I think it's in public preview in July, so it will probably release mainstream onto your Apple device sometime in early fall, maybe August or something like that, depending on how it goes, without very many updates to the artificial intelligence, meaningful updates, I would say. Some key things that they did say, which are maybe potentially better or will be better. They backtracked on the Photos app, and they now said you will have a tabbed experience, so you will have your library and then you will have your collections. Yes. So that big redesign that a lot of people complained about, they've taken a half measure to kind of make it back to more that experience where you have basically your camera roll, which they're calling the library, and then you still have all the organizational elements of the albums, collections, video, all the different things that you had before. Another one that is new and different is, and this is pretty revolutionary in my opinion, is there are now windows on iPads. So, I saw this article, like, did Apple just make an iPad a computer? Yeah, they kind of did. They kind of made it just like a laptop now. So, there was Stage Manager, which was a way to kind of do this, or you had like split mode where, you could put something on the left, you could put something on the right. That was dependent on the app developer allowing that and making that experience possible. The same thing with, like, if you go from like portrait to landscape, that's completely dependent on the app developer and if they designed that into their software. Yeah. Well, all that's taken to a different level now because along with all this glass and rounded corners, you can now window things. So you can have, a small window up here, window up here. You can layer the windows. So it's truly a different experience. I think that's pretty revolutionary and shows a big distinction in terms of what's going on with the iPad. They've refreshed CarPlay, which is great. We use CarPlay, so they've refreshed CarPlay to, one, allow widgets to be in there, which is nice. Two, they've gotten, I think, across all of the OSs, rid of this idea of like a annoying pop-up. So nothing's like a pop-up that's going to take place of everything. So the classic thing that they showed is, like, on Apple CarPlay, if someone called you while you were driving, the phone thing would just take up the whole screen. It's like, Josh is calling, and it's like, that's great, but I'm about to make a turn. And so that is all much more small. So there's more prominence on the actual driving experience. And this idea of widgets is quite nice because you can imagine having something like weather or other things in there. They've made some good improvements with the Apple Wallet. So one thing they announced was passports would be coming to Apple Wallet, and they could be used for domestic travel. That's on like a fall, maybe next year timeline. TBD, you can't add your passport to your phone at this point, I don't think. They're tightening integration on Wallet, so you can use like your rewards points at the point of purchase. So if you have, an American Express or something, if you have points on that, you can use them to pay whenever you do your Apple Pay in person, which is quite nice. I haven't seen that actually come up in any of my like processes or whatever, but that's really cool. They've refreshed some of that stuff. They have like a new, like, with your boarding pass, they now have like tracking of like the flight time and the in-air and like where you are, which is quite nice and is shareable. They've added airport maps, which is nice. With the Maps app, they've added this idea, like two kind of good ideas. One is long overdue, which is like your preferred route. So now the AI that's already been around for a long, long time is going to recognize and kind of take to heart your preferred route of doing something and have that be the first route. So how you get like obvious stuff versus maybe the most efficient route or the route that it thinks has, goes on the largest roads, I would say.
But there is no setting for that or anything.
Right.
So you can't pick what your route would be. You can't be like, oh, I know there's a construction or a slow road.
Yeah.
So I'm going to actually
That's true.
I don't want to use this road anymore for now. You can't select any of that stuff. You just drive, and eventually it will start picking that route as the primary route.
Yeah.
Which I guess is technically a solution.
There's this concept of visited places, so you can turn on your Maps program. Like if you went somewhere, if you drove past it or you stopped there, it will basically keep record of that local on device, which is important because you really necessarily wouldn't want your entire geolocation history exposed to people. And And so you can use that to kind of find different places. Watch updates, I think it's just more contextual. Like a good example is like allowing the sort of like trace back or like breadcrumbing of like you don't have a signal like and you're out in the wilderness or something like that. Now it's going to just be more like, oh yeah, we should enable the, find my way home basically. And then I don't know if there was much else that I was like, like, wow, this is really awesome, worth mentioning. Those were kind of top of mind. They did improve the music app. Oh, the phone stuff was interesting. That's the last thing, and then we'll move on. The phone stuff was interesting. They have introduced this concept of redesigning the phone interface. The phone app is now available on a computer and an iPad, which is huge. They've introduced this idea of more spam blocking and phone call filtering. So one of the demos they had was like, if it's a phone number you've never heard of, you're not even going to get the phone call. That's all going to happen behind the scenes, and someone will basically have to kind of say who they are and why they're calling you. And that will kind of intelligently break through as like, Gary is here with some flowers downstairs. It will ring your phone. You'll be able to pick it up and decide if you want to take that phone call, if that's a legitimate thing. They've also talked about live translation. They've talked about kind of better spam filters and that kind of stuff, pinning contacts on the phone app. So they've they've modernized the phone app in that regard. And they've done a little bit with the music app too, like penning is the same concept, like in terms of messages. With messages, they did add a lot of improvements, who's typing responses in group texts, backgrounds for messages like threads, like very much like WhatsApp or like Signal. This is not a new concept by any stretch of the imagination. Polls, so polls for group chats is kind of nice where you can actually just ask in line. But those were like kind of, I think, the main things that were, maybe cool. Any kind of final thoughts on or things that maybe, people should look out for before we kind of move on?
Not that, but I do think that there's a lot of things you brought up kind of bring up the philosophical kind of issues that we're going into, where we're clearly going to be interacting with software and things like that in a back and forth manner, in a very wide open back and forth manner. We'll go into this further in the next section, but that's where I think that the Apple is really coming off the rails. Is they're not prompting for input because they know that in the past a pop-up has been annoying. And a pop-up is annoying, but a plain language prompt in question isn't necessarily annoying. We answer them all the time on text. It's fine. If your phone was more integrated into your life, you wouldn't mind your phone popping up and being like, hey, what do you think about this? And you're like, well, it's getting late. Do you want to go into night mode? I was like, not yet. Let's do it in about, half an hour or something. And then let it take that back. And like you were saying, either reprompt and say, sleep mode in 30 minutes good, or just do that. But getting this back and forth thing that we have with like ChatGPT and other AIs is the current UI paradigm that they're just actively ignoring.
Yeah. So maybe the best way to kind of say it is like collaborating with AI.
Right. Collaborating with your phone, collaborating with your devices, which has been hard in the past, and only people who really know these things can do it. But that's what it's going to be. Collaborating is a good word.
Okay. So we've been talking a lot about AI, and one of the things that I'm very sensitive to is like, I don't know how much everybody knows, and I don't know how much I know. I feel like a bit behind, but then I feel very like much ahead of the game around a lot of things. So one of the things that, among the many things we're keeping a pulse on is just what's going on in AI, and maybe getting some more like history around this, because I think it's quite helpful. This is really keyed off of this, a lot of this stuff that you see in like the headlines are like, OpenAI is working on a mega data center in Texas. They just did a round of funding and they're going to reach this. They've got it's, massive. Every time you hear something in the technology, specifically AI realm, it's very much like massive numbers we've never seen before, these huge investments. probably the easiest way I can articulate this right now is Meta, so Facebook, is finally like getting more serious about AI in two ways. One is they have announced their own plans to build a data center and really acquire a bunch of the chips that are necessary to do AI, particularly generative AI. So think ChatGPT, so GPT type AIs, transformers. And also, and I won't get too into the weeds on it, is there was this big announcement that Meta was going to be, investing, take a large stake, really work with, partner with, I don't know what the best terminology is, this company called Scale, which does data annotation. Data annotation is basically a process where humans will review a couple things, what knowledge the AI has to determine the accuracy of it. We'll kind of teach it how to respond better to things, and we'll also review what its outputs are and flag any sort of issues. So if you imagine sort of the evolution of data annotation, which is a fascinating subject in and of itself, you can imagine it began as sort of basic moderation of is this harmful or not? Should we be showing this? And it's evolved into is this really good information? Is there more we could add to this information for it to be a more curated, more precise thing that the generative AI, the model, can spit out? So Facebook, I think, well, I'm just going to call them Facebook because it's the same thing with Twitter. Facebook is really taking a stance and kind of saying we need to actually, I would say that the Scale AI thing is we need to improve the quality of our AI. The chip part is, I think, similar, and I think that folds very well into the two things we want to talk about in this next subject, which is kind of I'm not going to say the beginning, but let's say some really good entry points in understanding this modern AI explosion, boom, etc. And those two things are actually documentaries. One is by OpenAI and one is by DeepMind, which is basically Google's AI shop. So I'm not going to go through these. I'm not going to play them or anything, but I will show you them because they are both on YouTube. Hopefully this works. So let me just go through this a little bit. So this first one, and I'll talk through it as it goes. This first one is called Artificial Gamer. This is by OpenAI. Yeah. Released in 2021. So this documentary, and I will put a link to it in there, basically goes through a team at OpenAI. This is probably in the 2017, 18, 19 timeframe, working together to build an artificial intelligence that could win at the video game of Dota 2. Dota 2 is a territory capture game would maybe be the best way to say it. Yeah. So the crux of this is it's a 5v5, so 5 AIs versus 5 human players. If you imagine it's sort of like a skirmish type thing. So you're on a map, the map never changes. There's 2 bases, and I apologize for any Dota 2 fans. I don't know much about this. My foray into it is within this, but it's important to just kind of, say it. But this is how I perceive it, is there's 2 different bases, red team's base and blue team's base. There's different characters you can play as called heroes, and you basically fight each other and you try to basically push on to capture the other person's base. There's something called an ancient inside. And then it's basically your typical Final Fantasy type thing where, you can cast spells, you can use weapons, there's equipment that you can, bomb, there's different things that you can do. But at the heart of it, it's just a strategy skirmish game, conquer game with a team of 5. So this documentary goes through that. I'm going to pause. Anything you want to add to what I'm saying there?
Yeah, just that, if you think of a video game as it's a fairly complex game because there are so many characters, and each of the characters has very unique options. So if you think of something like Halo, where you have one kind of character, which is the Master Chief, he can hold 2 guns at a time. There's 5, probably 10 guns available. You can interact with everybody. Everybody has the same skills, and then you're playing capture the flag, whatever it is. That's a much simpler game than this one, which is dozens, I think, like
100 plus.
100 plus different characters with different attributes that have completely different capabilities, and it's like
much more Lord of the Rings.
Yes, and so like big guys can smash little guys, but little guys can outrun big guys, and so there's all these different things, and the level of complexity is very high, and this is the point, is that it's a very complex game, though it takes place on the same board. That's mostly for sporting, like when you play a game, you like to play on the same field. That way, every time you play a game, you're at least starting on the same field. So that's all I would say, is that it's just a very complex game.
Yeah.
It's more than a shooter. It's more than a lot of games as far as like the complexity that you would have to give a computer to be able to play it.
Other things we're saying is like it's a common, I'm going to say trope, but it's a common thing for, as artificial intelligence has improved, to put it up against things like games,
Yes.
like AI beating, a grandmaster at chess. This one at Dota 2. The other one we're going to talk about is AlphaGo, which is Google's AI playing the game of Go. And so yes, like that's a big part of this, and that's kind of why they did this as well. The reason why we recommend this, and this is getting back to the point, is like, where is AI? Like, what is it doing? This documentary does a fantastic job explaining artificial intelligence.
Yes, showing you how they did it.
Like the nuts and bolts of how it's done, what they did to get it there. And it goes through, and this is why it's really critical, in my opinion, is we're talking about the OpenAI team. We're talking pre-ChatGPT.
Right.
Like, this is before ChatGPT was around. So you didn't have a chat interface for this stuff. And this is a completely separate thing. Like,
Yeah, this is not an LLM.
These are bots working on their own, making moves, pushing buttons, for lack of better terminology, autonomously. So they go into extreme detail into how do they train it, how do they improve it, what did they have to think about, and what happened when they hit various walls along the way. You get a good sense of the operating model of OpenAI. This is early days when it's truly a nonprofit, and it looks like a research house. It looks like a bunch of kids inside of the physics study room at a university or something like that. So you get a good sense of the grassroots of OpenAI. When it started, this is when Elon Musk was still a huge backer of OpenAI. So this is before all of the turmoil associated with Elon's, dramatic exit. This is before the ousting and bringing back of Sam Altman in 2024. So this is pre-people believing that AI could eat the world, I would say, would be a good way to think about it. And the reason, again, like why it's really well done, and I think that this game, Dota 2, actually helps a lot in this, and they use a lot of visuals to represent it. Like they show a character moving around and taking dumb actions, like just walking into a wall over and over again, walking across a bridge and falling down like 1,000 times. So if you need a mental image of how this stuff works and what it means, why they need so many chips, etc., this is the film.
Yeah.
This is absolutely the film. There are some key leaders in there and researchers in there that are still at OpenAI today that are pushing the strategy and direction of the AI tools that they are putting out for mass commercial and consumer adoption, which is quite interesting. So you get some good insights into that. And I think it's the best demonstration that I've seen to date visually. You can consume this in less than 2 hours.
Yep.
To get you into the realm of like, what are they actually doing at OpenAI? Anything else you want to add to this?
Are we going to show any of this, or we're going to kind of?
I don't have any
that's
clips show. Yeah.
No, so that's fine. I don't think it's necessary, but I agree with everything you're saying. It's important to emphasize that this is not LLM technology. This is the classic we just put something into a machine and just keep testing it or keep running simulations until eventually it figures out how to play the game and all that stuff. And that's also what AlphaGo does, and we'll get into that. But like this is a very good way. They talk about specific things that can be a problem and how you would train it. They talk about the specific time it took. The important thing to remember is it's 2018 that they did this. It doesn't matter. It's around there. It's before 2020.
18, 19 timeframe, I'm pretty sure.
Yes. And we are 6 or 7 years later from that, maybe 8 from initial development. And this stuff is already pretty terrifying if you think of what they're doing here.
So one of the things that kind of feeds into this, and the reason why we actually watched this film, is I read a book called Empire of AI, which goes into OpenAI in a lot of detail. And so maybe a better way to say this is one of the sort of exhibition tools that they made to get funding from major organizations. So Elon Musk had originally said, we need to pledge $1 billion towards this. I will fill any gaps in terms of monetary commitment. He never spent any of that. But as you can imagine, when Elon exited, they had to get some sort of other large entity to do all their backing. That has been Microsoft. And so at least in terms of an Empire of AI, I'll give you a link to that book as well. This is one of the demos that they put in front of Bill Gates to get his perspective on the utility of it and to get his sense of it. And please wait till the very end, because there's something in like the credits that's very useful, more around robotics that was also shown to Bill Gates. I will tell you that Bill wasn't impressed by these things.
Right.
So you didn't get Bill Gates to buy in based on these things. So keep that in mind as you're going through this experience. Is like, this was used as an exhibition tool to get money and more funding associated with this. I think you'll see exactly why there's a very pivotal moment in there that kind of explains the trajectory, the path that we've gone on in terms of, super modern AI. But Bill Gates was not impressed by what he saw within this.
He's like, I could probably beat this thing, which we'll come back to.
And interesting to say, I hate to harp on Elon Musk, but Elon Musk is a big Dota 2 person. Elon Musk likes to talk about Dota 2, and there's a lot of conspiracies or truths out there, rumors that maybe he uses bots, because obviously there's this, OpenAI, the company that he had a vested interest in at the time, developed developed a bot to do Dota 2. It's very competitive. It's ranked because of a lot of this, because it has that kind of sportsman angle that Josh is talking about. And so it comes up a lot from that perspective. It's very similar, I would say, to the same thing, like people who like chess like this or like Go, it's a closed system is maybe the best way to say it. Unlike other video game systems where you maybe gain experience over long periods of time and you bring that in, or you acquire equipment, you start from the same level 0 and you build up throughout the duration of the game. It's the same thing in chess. You both start with your pieces in the exact same place. The only thing you have as an advantage is your mind and any past experiences that you bring into it and how well you can read your opponent. The same thing is true with Dota 2.
Yep, I agree.
So this, I think, came out in 2021. It's an hour and 31 minutes. It's hugely worth the investment.
Yeah.
And it's interesting.
And I would say, I'll say this, because we kind of just talk about these things. AI is the most important thing that's happening on the planet right now. No matter what else you see, this is the thing. This is the Manhattan Project.
Yep.
This is...
That's how we feel about it.
Yeah, this is how we feel about it. There's a chance that it's not actually anything. Sure, I mean, you could bet that. Like, you could bet that maybe electricity was not actually going to be anything. That's what it is. They're inventing electricity, and 2 years ago they had a simple, generator. Now we're in the 1950s with electricity. We're about to be, maybe in a year, we'll be in the 90s of electricity. Like the speed at which things are coming along here is unbelievable, and it's going to catch anybody off guard that's not at least a little bit. And this is really the least you could do. This is like watching a documentary on the Manhattan Project during World War II.
Right.
Yeah.
This is watching Oppenheimer.
This is watching Oppenheimer in 1940. You get a chance to see what the literal future happens, and you can try to make some decisions based on that. You obviously don't know that there's going to be an arms race, but you can kind of imagine there might be. You don't know that eventually people are going to calm down. You don't know what's going to happen in the future, but at least you can see that people are building giant bombs in New Mexico.
And who those people are.
Exactly who they are.
The stewards of this technology.
Yes.
Which is critical, right? Like,
yes. The most critical thing is the people pulling this along.
Yes.
Because the people pulling this along are pulling nuclear weapons into your household. So that's an important part.
So the other one is AlphaGo, and I was kind of clicking around while you were talking. So AlphaGo is, like I said, AlphaGo is the name of an AI that Google's DeepMind. I always get it DeepMind, right?
Yeah.
I get DeepSeek, which is the Chinese one, mixed up with DeepMind, which is the Google one. So DeepMind is basically a research organization with deep ties to Oxford. So it's British, I think, by nature. The chief guy among all this guy named Demise. He's, it's all folded into Google now, but he's British. He was a little chess player of his own. Go, I've got it up here now. This is the game we're talking about. So strong ties to Asia, so Japan, China, Korea. This is kind of maybe their version of chess. One of the key things that's said in this, but people say, is that Go is considered like one of the four areas where you'd become like a Renaissance person. So I think one of them's Go, one of them's music, one of them is calligraphy. I can't remember what the last one is, but you can imagine that same kind of concept. Like maybe in Western, it's like Western civilizations, it's like being well read, being able to play a musical instrument, being able to like
running
ride a horse. If you're a woman, it's painting, it's embroidery, having some sort of skill in that fashion. So this has deep roots in that regard, and this is used, it's a pure strategy game in the same sense. You start with a naked board, you have a single opponent, and you are basically drawing out territories and capturing boxes, I guess would be maybe the best way to describe it.
Yeah.
They go into how Go is played if you're unfamiliar. This one came out in 2016. So
yes.
Let's say
when did it take place? It takes place in like 2 years before that, right? 2014 or something.
No, I think it takes place.
In 2016?
I think it's
Okay.
like 2016. Again, I'm
that's
not
fine.
sure the
We're not gonna
dates,
go
but you will have probably seen this. That this is when people like opened their eyes, like woke up to what AI could be. This is the moment where, if you remember, a computer beating the grand chess master, this is the moment. More than the Dota 2 thing, like which happened afterward.
Right.
But
and it was significantly more challenging.
Once Go happened, people were like, "Oh shit, this is real. We've done something." So the spoiler of this is that eventually, like, this is not spoiled because this is 10 years removed. Yeah, history. Good way to put it. History at this point. It was able to beat humans.
Yes.
There's a lot more, obviously, within this film, and it is very much worth the watch. But I want to say that's why it's interesting is, I'm saying do the 2021 do the OpenAI one first, which was the Dota thing, which is a lot more challenging than Go, and then go back and look at this, because this is kind of the first take on it. And you can actually see some things that the OpenAI folks kind of, the creativity and the innovation and the angle they took with it, and how that compares to this group of people. The most interesting thing, in my opinion, about this film, and why it matters if you are someone who wants to know more about artificial intelligence, is what happens when the computer beats a human.
Yes, this is the most important thing in this story.
This documentary, I don't want to use the word masterfully again, but very well captures, and you can see in real time.
Yes.
Right. That's it's a shift, right? Like it's a fundamental shift. There's I hate the word transcendence, but there's a transcendence. Something changes in these people when this happens.
Yes.
And you can see it. These are people that have devoted their lives to something. Their entire ego, their entire persona, their entire sense of self-worth might be built up into playing this game.
Yes.
And they go into a lot of the history of Go and like how it lives in there. Like there's a good moment where there's like a Go school, and like there's this really fascinating moment where like you can imagine like a sage Go teacher, you know, this is like Karate Kid. It's like when you hold the piece, you hold it this way to demonstrate this. So there's so many opinions about this. And so I would say if you found Queen's Gambit interesting from a chess perspective, you would find this interesting from how they cover the game and really the human shifts and changes in like what happens. And I want you to remember, this is 2016. This is a very narrow AI thing.
Yes.
And the experiences that these people go through, which are very, very real, are worth seeing, because this is what's going to happen to you. That's my opinion. This is what's going to happen to you. One day, if it hasn't happened already, it will happen to you.
Yes.
When I talk about having sort of like a crisis of reality, or like, you know, an existential crisis of being, you're going to see that in here in real time.
And prepare, like, put yourself in those shoes for whatever you're doing, for whatever you think is your special skill, for whatever you think you bring to the table, besides like your raw humanity or whatever, but like whatever skills that you've learned over time and you've mastered, just bring that same sense to it. These people are the best in the world at a game that's played by billions of people.
For thousands of years.
You do not have the kind of skill that these people have in this game at anything. And watch what happens to them when they see this happen. Like
when this occurs.
We see it everywhere today. I think it causes a lot of issues, and I don't know if we want to go into it right now, but I think that reaction is obviously warranted. Feelings are warranted, all those things, but like understanding the opportunity that you have now with something that's actually better than you at something is really where, like, the growth you can get from something that will always be better than you it's infinite. You can grow your mind with this stuff.
Yeah, that's one of the key takeaways that we have is like, you know, if you can move past your ego, which can be challenging, and again, you know, we're talking about AI in general and how people most experience it right now is like, you know, write my emails for me, which is kind of superficial in terms of like, it's not really, you know, we've had autocorrect for years. You know, everybody likes this idea, of summarizing things better and like putting together emails because it's it's one step less personalized. It's a little bit more, it's a little friendlier. It's easier to digest. It's like a layer back. What we have said from this is like, imagine you're the best person in the world at this game. You are literally the best person at Go on the planet right now. You've proven that over and over again. How do you improve? How do you get better?
Right.
Who are your competitors? If you know, who does Usain Bolt run against if he's the fastest man in the world? And this,
he has to run against somebody on a motorbike.
Right.
And that's the exact same thing. You gotta run against a machine.
Yeah. So I really think it makes sense to kind of think about it in that light and consider that when you go through it. But it's a fascinating thing. One of the more interesting things about it is, so the deep mind folks are actually the people that came up with this transformer logic concept that is what is fueling all of the LLMs, as we call it, so the ChatGPT experience. Even there's other technologies kind of built into the image generation, but a lot of this stuff really, the research approach, the actual like structural approach of how to do this came from these guys, came from the Google guys. So, and this is where it gets unique, is like the OpenAI guys apply things in different ways, but these guys are generating the different methods, right? So, you know, it's maybe a good analogy is like car manufacturers, you know, like Ford's got an engine, and then whatever, Chevrolet's got an engine, and Ford comes up with a new method for better air intake. But Chevy applies that in a more creative way. Yeah. And so there's a good distinction, I think, in these sort of houses of AI that kind of come out. this is again 10 years ago, so some things have changed, but some things, like the guy that you see, Demise, he's the guy on 60 Minutes. He's the face of it. He is lauded and stated to be the most brilliant mind around artificial intelligence right now. A lot of there is built on the lore that you will see in terms of he was a little chess prodigy, etc. But that all fuels into what this is. And a part of this, I think, as well, which was critical for me, is humanizing this.
Yes.
Because it is to a layman, it looks like magic.
Yeah, the Dota one kind of, like, they go through the human element, like, one or two here. This one really emphasizes human. It's a lot slower. So if you're like me and you like faster paced things, it is going to be considerably slower than the first one. I think it's longer and covers a simpler subject.
Yeah.
But
it does.
The main thing is the human growth of it. And that's why I think, because
and they don't cover any of
they
it
don't
like
cover
that.
the technical stuff at all.
How they did this, like,
right.
It's vague at best.
Right.
You get
so take your knowledge from Dota. Imagine that they instead did the same stuff for AlphaGo at a much smaller scale. Again, this game is a million times easier to understand than Dota 2, and that's one thing that you really lose in the Dota 2 when you first watch it. You're like, wow, they did that. That's pretty cool. But you have to understand that they did something that's again unimaginable, basically. Like that they've made something that's probably a million times more complex than this, and this is a pretty good achievement.
The last thing I want to say associated with this, and then I want to kind of take the two concepts we've talked about, the Apple stuff and this, and kind of finish our discussion, sort of the combination of these two, is watch closely what humans' reactions are when they first experience this. Like, forget the winning and losing part and how that affects their ego, but pay special attention to when they're first exposed to this.
Yes.
Because that's really key here. There's some key things that people say multiple times across both of these different concepts. And I think that that's very important, and that's going to fundamentally shift what we as a species, as an entity, as a society, as a culture, and I mean this on like the globe, like humanity, like general things we think to be true about humanity from a psychological perspective, from a being and belonging perspective, from a self-worth perspective, like purpose, like you are going to potentially question a lot of things, and I'll leave it vague like that, but pay special attention to that. And again, these are both great watches, especially for like kids or families. Like, this is, they're both very well done. They're very, in high school I watched this documentary on like getting to like a spelling bee, and it's riveting. Yeah. If you're someone who likes to see athletes like actually like, train up and get there, and the spectacle of it and what it is. Like, if you're someone who gets like the tingles whenever you're watching the Olympics and like Simone Biles, how's she going to perform? This will hit all those boxes. And I would say do watch it if you have kids. It's not, or if you're an adult, whatever, but it's a fun watch, and it's probably something worth watching more than once, honestly, to just.
I was just gonna say we should go back and watch the AlphaGo one again.
Takeaways, because,
not the AlphaGo, the
right, because I think the first time, because there's a bit. I mean, a lot of this stuff is Josh said history, so it's not like the outcomes are like secret, but how they get to the outcome the first time, you kind of have to watch that unfold through there. But then knowing that the first time, if you watch it again, it might be different.
Yeah. The one thing I'll say is just remember that, like, when you're watching these, you're the person that is coming to challenge the AI.
Yeah.
And just look at the confidence that people have when they step up to these machines because of their experience with machines in the past. And just watch their faces, listen to what they say, because these are the words that you're saying right now. And it's just not the case. The machines are coming. They get twice as fast every year. And so even if they weren't good enough this year, the hardware, they'll be good enough next year. And if it's not next year, it's the year after that. And so you really can't beat that growth. It's coming. It's going to be here. It's probably going to be within the next 5 years. It might be 10 years. But within 5 years, we may be living in a completely different world and doing a completely different understanding of the world. And think about it for a second as to what we're looking at.
everyone has varied opinions on this. We saw something on a podcast like the other day that's like, we are in February of 2020, right before the pandemic hits. And like, this is the, canary in the coal mine. These are the, trickle through things. I don't know necessarily. So I have fundamental differences in belief here. So one, from a technical perspective, from like a capability perspective, all of this is further along than people realize. Now, they haven't mastered some aspects of it, but it's all further along than they realize, and the money's already spent. There's already things being built. It's done. Like, this is not they're planning for this. They are building for this. They have started building. That was already occurring, right? Everything you might think about where it is, you're wrong. It's 4 years, 5 years further than you have even fathomed or can believe. First of all, I think there's been a huge avoidance of how this is going to impact labor and workforces. But at the same time I'm saying that, this past week, Google has announced buyouts for any employee that wants to leave the company as they kind of redefine their strategy and clear the way as to what the future of their company is going to be. That is a huge signal. That is a huge, huge signal. Google is a wildly profitable company. They don't need to
get rid of anybody.
Do a grand spectacle of, if you don't want to be here, we'll pay for you not to be here anymore. They don't need to do that at all. They, people say within like their advertising realm and their search realm, which is their bread and butter, right? Everything, a lot of where Google makes their money is on advertising revenue. And the fact that they are saying, these cuts are across the board, or where the cuts are occurring, which I think tends to be in those areas. In those areas, some people have said this is the demonstration of like how AI is going to, they're showing you where AI is taking over from the human perspective. So I firmly believe it's further along than everybody realizes. I'm trying my best to keep up with it, and I feel much more close to it, but I think there's a lot more protectionism than we realize. Yes. Sam Altman's a strange character in the sense that he somewhat acts like sort of like this sage of wisdom of like, this prophet of or messiah of AI. And he posted like something on his blog. There's this concept of the singularity, which I won't get too deep into, but he basically has said like, super intelligence is coming, like not in a short term, like super intelligence is beyond artificial general intelligence where, AI can.
It's better than us.
Yes, it's just unequivocally better than us. So keep that all in mind. The reason why I say that people are behind it is there's a lot of avoidance. There's a lot of denial that's going on. And I think a lot of that is driven by the bedrocks that have been our society for a long enough period of time. The easiest one for me to harp on, just through my own experience, is white-collar jobs or the necessity to have a job. There's long been, and it's entwined in American culture, American being, that you have to have a job to have access to healthcare. You have to have a job to demonstrate self-worth to some degree. I'm very sensitive to this because that's kind of how I felt for a long time, was climbing the ladder. That's what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to go to school, get a good job, begin a career, continue to grow within that career, be rewarded by corporations over time for your contributions. But the reality of this is a lot of it's bullshit. A lot of the jobs are bullshit. A lot of the stuff that people do is bullshit. When Josh is in a bad mood, sometimes he talks about some corporations are just adult daycare. I think we're
even
really,
in a good mood,
yeah, we're getting to a point where it's going to be hard to ignore why certain jobs exist anymore. And I don't mean that as the people doing these jobs aren't talented or have value or skill. I just mean it's no longer going to be necessary if a robot can, a technical entity, whatever, can do this with more precision than you. And they can't. They can just do it more precisely than you. They're going to spell the word right 100% of the time. They just are. They can access the information and do that. So there's going to be a huge reconciliation. And I think what you can see, my perspective, and I want to hear yours, obviously, is from an administration perspective, from a leadership perspective, There's a lot of denial around this from a journalistic, from a mainstream media, or just any sort of media perspective, journalism, just all of that in general. People are actively ignoring this. It reminds me of that Don't Look Up movie with Leonardo DiCaprio. People are pretending that this isn't already here. There's vast amounts of evidence that it's already here. You already trust AI and use AI way more than you think that you do for more than you could even imagine. And yet we are not having an open and honest dialogue on the main stage of society around this.
Yeah.
And I worry about that. And I also worry that these technologies are gatekept by a small group of people. And if we look at the money that is fueling this, the money that is fueling this is all from the Silicon Valley angle. And you know what the last era of Silicon Valley was. It's social media.
Yep.
Period.
And that's, I guess we're in here now, right?
Yeah.
We're talking
the
about
circle,
it,
yeah. Circling back, bringing it all together. So yes, I kind of went on for a long time, but we showed you the AI. We showed you Apple's AI. This is current. This has happened this week. Here it is. We told you, here's 2 documentaries around Google and OpenAI, which are arguably at the forefront of artificial intelligence technology. I've given you, you've given your kind of scariness on this. And
I'm about to get it real scary.
let's drop some realness. Do I need to get a microphone for you to drop?
Maybe. It's got a protective cover, so we could drop them. Yeah, so I agree with obviously everything you're saying. I do think that, like, I'll continue the metaphor. Look at when you watch AlphaGo especially, think about these people and how they're losing this skill they have, and just look at the way the media covers AI and how they're afraid of the skill that they have being lost. And that's in my opinion, one of the big reasons why we don't see enough about what effectively is, the next step in our existence on the planet. And I can't overstate this enough. I know this stuff sounds crazy. I'm limited by language on how serious I can be on this. I am more serious than anything. We're coming to a crazy time. And media is hiding it and downplaying it, just like you'll see the people are right before they play the robots. Those people, they're pretending like it's not a thing. The government's doing the same. The AI is going to be better at all of those things than those people are. And that's going to be an important turning point, is when we have these things. I do want to say, I think that news and live stuff and a podcast, people you trust, things like that are still going to be very important. And I think that the big thing that the media is doing is missing the opportunity to really tie down their pipelines of information to say, look, we are a news covering thing and we're going to actually cover news. And you lose all your credibility when you don't cover the most important thing to ever happen to humanity ever. That is, you're just not covering the news if you're not covering that.
So I want to interject this because I think this is important, and then you can keep going, is this belief is not based on what you think is going to happen, like what the better version of AI is. I think a lot of this is based on what AI already is.
Oh, yeah.
So if AI never gets better than what we've seen today or experienced today,
right,
everything you're saying, still true.
Yes. Yes. Because let's say that we're at the limit of intelligence for computers, which, if you think about it, is kind of a crazy thing. I've talked to ChatGPT about this. Obviously, it's a computer brain. But, the number of things that have to happen for there to be some sort of plateau where, like, oh, we can't get any smarter on these computers. We could throw more and more power at them, but they don't get any smarter. Even if that were the case, even if ChatGPT were just as smart as it is today, but it was just faster and there were more of them. So then what you could have is a team of 500 ChatGPTs instantly debating the answer to a question and then instantly coming up with the answer to that question. Even in that scenario, you're still in a completely different world where programs you want to have built if I want this iPad to be a 3D tunnel that I just kind of swim through or whatever, I can ask that of ChatGPT in its current state in 5 years of processing improvements. Like once the Texas thing's online and once I have that Texas thing in my pocket, like what do you think is going to happen? It's the moon landing computers are as capable as the calculator program on your iPhone. It's not even going to be close on that sense. But that's under the weird assumption that it doesn't actually get any smarter, which they have said is not showing anywhere. There's no indication that it's plateauing. The more they add, the better it is. The better content they add, the better it is. And that goes back to your talk about that annotation company.
Yeah.
Annotation is everything. And this is probably, from what you read and told me, this is probably where OpenAI got ahead of everybody else.
Yes.
Because Facebook thought they had all of Facebook.
Yep.
And Google thought they had all of Google.
And WhatsApp.
Right. Facebook thought they had all this stuff. Google thought they have all this stuff.
Yep.
OpenAI didn't have either of those things, so
Nope.
they had to get it themselves.
Yep.
And when they went out and got it themselves and weren't resting
Using
on their
humans.
laurels, yes, using
Human
humans,
labor.
yes. Again, questionable ethically.
Already done though.
Already done. They came out way ahead, and
Yep.
they're still ahead.
Yep.
And that's the thing, is that's the joke here, is that like DeepMind had this kind of chatbot thing before ChatGPT does, and they have a chatbot now. But which one is better to use? And
That's a key thing that Apple says, which you might pick up on if you decide to go look more into this, is Apple says, and I think that this is maybe a great way to say it, is ChatGPT, OpenAI's ChatGPT model is the best broad use, broad knowledge AI, which means something. So it knows the most, it's like Wikipedia to some degree. It knows the most about everything, right? It could solve Jeopardy really well, right? That's distinctly different than where AI can absolutely go down these narrow veins. Like you see it with Go, you can see it with a lot of the medical breakthroughs and things that are happening. Imagine if AI didn't have to know, all of the episode titles of Rick and Morty, right? It doesn't need that extraneous information. What if it only knows about cat behavior or something like that? The entire brain of it is all about cats. How much could it bring that together and be knowledgeable about that, et cetera? Or like, what if it, looked at, elephant recordings of utterances or behavior or whatever, and like it just looked at that. Like I think the ChatGPT veneer gets overplayed in terms of how artificial intelligence can be beneficial. Again, just because it's that particular thing. And this is why software engineering has gotten so good so quickly with artificial intelligence, is because there is these huge swaths of knowledge that are available on the internet that are bringing this together. But again, imagine if it's unencumbered by having to know, all the colors of the rainbow, and it really only needs to know this narrow thing to do its job, which is where we're going. This idea of, we kind of came into this year with this idea of like agents were going to be a thing. Agentic was huge. It's weird how that's kind of changed, but it's, at least in terms of my maturity with artificial intelligence, that's happening. So at least the way I work with artificial intelligence, instead of having one ChatGPT to focus on something one at a time, I might engage 4 at the same time with different roles. One might be the role of like a programming expert. One might be the role of like a copyright editor for a blog post. One might be the role of my coach or something like that. And then it all comes together to orchestrate something greater than the sum of its parts. And that is where, when I think about agentic, that's where I go with this. And so you can imagine that in mass around every single subject area that has any sort of depth of knowledge and what that might mean.
Yeah.
I feel like we're very doomy about this, but we're not doomy about it.
I'm not doomy. I'm doomy in the
I'm
sense
excited, but I don't know what 1 year from now is going to look like. I don't know what 3 years from now looks like. This is why we're doing this.
Yes. I do think that people need to get very serious about like, and I want to also be very clear about this. I don't think that the answer here is regulation or anything like that.
It's not extreme measures. It's not extreme regulation. It's not extremely no regulation.
Right. Because
I think it's get informed. Just get educated first.
yes, but like the clock is ticking.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? That's why there's no regulation, because, you know, Congress going back and forth 3 times, it's just not useful. Like, you can't get the regulation that you would need after
They
that.
are not going to figure this out.
Right.
They didn't figure out social media.
Right.
They're not figuring this out in the time that it needs. This is faster than social media.
Right. So this is the thing, is that we're going into a new world. It's going to be here before anybody knows it. You know, you may say, well, you know, social media never panned out and all that stuff. And that's true. It never did pan out to anything good. And that has to be kept in mind, because the people in charge of this
They're the same people.
are the same people who monetized
all your pictures
all
and
your
dumped
pictures.
ads all over you and give you fake news and
making people
pitted you
anxious
against your family
Right.
members for
Exactly.
politics.
Exactly. Those people, and you'll see, like,
Off
also
Twitter.
Also think about this with the AlphaGo stuff. Think about what they did to do that, and then remember that Facebook and Twitter and all these other ones are doing that same exact processes, but to get you to be on the phone longer. So every time you get off the phone and somebody else doesn't get off the phone, they see what they did with that guy. And they've been working on it with billions of dollars for years and years. So they've been using artificial intelligence to get you to be on your phone more.
Yes, that's a really good point. That's a very salient point, which is, imagine how good, like, I think there's a number out around the Dota AI that costs like one of the 2 things, it costs like $25 to $35 million. That was millions of pennies, millions, low millions of dollars spent to get these algorithms to be at the level that they're capable of from a competition perspective. Now look at Meta as a company.
Right.
Billions. We are talking billions of dollars to do this stuff. That is their entire identity. So that if there's no clear signal, then like how good this shit is, billions of dollars is spent, like Josh is saying, to keep you locked in to your phone, to
Yes.
keep you scrolling, it is hijacking your brain and the way it works and how your interest is held
Yes.
in what it does. This is not pseudoscience, this is reality. Now, those people, they have the academic and technical prowess to do this stuff at this point in time. Again, a very small group of people comparatively. You know, we're talking maybe 100,000 people. Or so. I don't have a good number in this, but this is why you need to call and question and be very, draw your own opinions
Yeah.
around these key players, around every single person you see, because they're building it. What are their motivations? What are their objectives? What are they aiming to do from this?
Yes.
Because that will invariably determine the direction that this stuff is developed. Now, that's not to say that other people aren't going to develop around it, but there is going to be a period, or potentially a period of pain. I think there's likely a period of pain or discomfort.
Well, sure, the longer people have their head in the sand, the longer there's going to be pain. Like, I mean, I think as long as you don't acknowledge what's coming and you don't try to experience that attack on your ego from a machine, which again, we've been, I joked with Anna, it's like, you know, the very first person who like was like the strong man in the village, and then somebody came up with a stick and lifted something on a lever, and that strong man was like, what the heck am I doing here? Is going to experience the same thing that we don't remember it because we were never the fastest runner in the world. But somebody showed up with a bicycle one day and was like, you know, I don't have to run that fast, and it's easier. And then we had cars. So we've done this many times. The thing that we haven't seen is anything beat our intellectual ability, but we've beaten our physical abilities many times over. We've beaten our intellectual abilities down certain lanes, like calculator's faster than you, this thing's faster at typing, that thing's faster, and really you can almost get all of it together, but none of it can put it together like we can right now. And that's gonna be something that a machine can do better than us. So we have to look at the future like, well, what if I don't have to do all the thinking and something else is gonna do the thinking for me, and what can I do with that? And it's the same thing as like, I don't have to run to the next village, I'm gonna drive my car to the next village. What does that change for society? And so these are the kinds of questions that you should be feeling in your heart and soul right now about what the future is going to be, and think about like, you know, what this means for all things that are going to happen in the future.
Any other thoughts as we wrap up?
I think I'm going to stop it there because I think we've dropped enough bombs for today. I have other things to say, but maybe I'll do that in print.
Yeah, so for anyone who has watched it, is watching this and who watched episode 1, thank you so much. We appreciate your viewership and your support. It's been fun. We hope that we only continue to grow in this. Love to hear any thoughts or comments you have associated with this topic. If you think that we are wildly out of alignment, please let us know, because we are in a very murky place right now. By no means.
Yeah, we don't have any crystal balls.
We can only see what we can see. You know, we're
looking at what we can see.
Limited.
And we're guessing that this line goes that way. That's all we can do. But like, we're talking about the difference between just continuing business as normal and another way where things just go crazy. So you should probably be prepared for the go crazy side, even if we go normal.
And then worth saying, and I will end with this, if all else fails and you only have, you know, bad things to say of no relevancy or are not adding to the conversation, we weren't talking to you.
That is always the point.
You can, as Josh likes to say, smash that stop button at any time.
You could have smashed it a long time ago. But anyway, thanks for listening if you did.
Bye.
Bye.